In the vast dark expanse of space where stars shimmered like distant diamonds and planets hung silently in their orbits, humanity had spread its reach far beyond Earth. It was a time when colonies dotted the galaxy, each one a small outpost, of life clinging to survival in an unforgiving universe. Among these colonies was Delta 7, a rocky planet on the edge of a star system known for its harsh winds and barren landscapes. But Delta 7 wasn't just another desolate world. It was home to one of the most critical negotiations between humans and an alien race called the Valons. Jack Monroe stood at the edge of the landing pad, his boots crunching against the fine dust that coated everything on this planet. At 62 years old, Jack was no stranger to danger or responsibility. His face bore the marks of countless battles and sleepless nights, with deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. He wore a simple gray jumpsuit, patched up in places from years of use, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen it all. To many, he was a legend, a pilot whose name was whispered in awe by rookies and veterans alike. Yet to others, he was simply an old man past his prime, a relic of a bygone era. Behind him, a sleek transport ship sat waiting, its engines humming softly as it prepared for departure. The ship wasn't large, just big enough for 3 people, but it was reliable, built to withstand the rigors of interstellar travel. Jack had flown vessels like this hundreds of times before, navigating asteroid fields, dodging enemy fire, and outrunning cosmic storms. Today's mission, however, felt different. This wasn't about escaping danger or completing some daring rescue. No, today was about babysitting. Frank Dawson emerged from the nearby building, flanked by 2 armed guards. Unlike Jack, Frank looked every bit the part of a diplomat. His tailored suit was immaculate, even in the dusty environment of Delta 7, and his polished shoes gleamed under the dim light of the twin suns. Frank's hair was neatly combed back, and his sharp features gave him an air of authority. He walked with purpose, his chin held high, as if he owned not just the planet but the entire galaxy. In truth, Frank was a high-ranking official sent by Earth's government to negotiate trade agreements with the Valons. And now, after weeks of tense discussions, he was finally heading home. As Frank approached the ship, his gaze flicked over Jack with barely concealed disdain. "You're the pilot?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "That's right," Jack replied, his voice calm but firm. "Name's Jack Monroe. I'll be getting you back to Earth in one piece." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Monroe, he muttered, pretending to search his memory. "Oh yes, I've heard of you. Aren't you the guy who got stranded on Vega 5 a few years ago? Had to hitch a ride with a cargo freighter?" Jack didn't flinch. "That's me. Lucky. Break 2? Those freighters don't usually stop for anyone." Frank smirked, clearly enjoying the jab. "Well, let's hope your luck holds out this time. I'd hate to have my schedule disrupted because of some oversight on your part." Before Jack could respond, Maria Lopez appeared, carrying a toolkit slung over her shoulder. She was short and wiry, with dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail and grease stains on her hands. Her jumpsuit was similar to Jack's, though hers was covered in more patches and scorch marks. Despite her unassuming appearance, Maria was one of the best engineers in the fleet, capable of fixing anything from a broken fuel line to a malfunctioning hyperdrive. "Everything set?" she asked, glancing between Jack and Frank. "Almost," Jack said, giving Frank a pointed look. "Just waiting for our esteemed passenger to board." Frank huffed, but didn't argue further. With a dismissive wave, he climbed into the ship, followed closely by Maria. Jack lingered for a moment, gazing out at the horizon. The wind kicked up, sending swirls of dust dancing across the landing pad. For a brief second, he felt a pang of nostalgia. Space had been his home for so long, yet lately, it seemed less exciting and more exhausting. Shaking off the thought, he turned and stepped aboard the ship, sealing the hatch behind him. Inside, the cabin was cramped but functional. 2 seats faced the cockpit, while a small sleeping area and storage compartment occupied the rear. Frank had already taken one of the front seats, reclining slightly as if he were settling into a luxury cruiser rather than a utilitarian transport vessel. Maria busied herself checking the ship's systems, running diagnostics, and making adjustments, as needed. You know, Frank said, breaking the silence. I expected someone younger for this job, someone with a bit more energy. Jack ignored the comment and slid into the pilot's seat. Energy doesn't keep you alive out here, Mr. Dawson. Experience does. Frank chuckled dryly. We'll see about that. Maria shot Jack a sympathetic glance but said nothing. She knew better than to get involved in their verbal sparring. Instead, she focused on her work, tapping away at the control panel. After a few moments, she frowned and leaned closer to inspect the readings. What is it? Jack asked, noticing her expression. I'm picking up something odd, she replied. There's an energy signature coming from outside the ship. Not natural, too consistent. Jack raised an eyebrow. Could it be interference from the colony? Maria shook her head. No, this is something else. It's faint, but it's definitely there. Frank perked up at this, leaning forward in his seat. What kind of energy signature? Is it dangerous? It's hard to say, Maria admitted. Could be anything. Radiation, a malfunctioning, satellite, maybe even something left behind by the Valons. Jack considered this for a moment. Let's keep an eye on it. If it gets stronger, we'll investigate. Frank crossed his arms, clearly unimpressed. Investigate? We don't have time for detours. My schedule is tight and I can't afford delays. And we can't afford surprises, Jack countered. If there's something out there, we need to know about it. Frank opened his mouth to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, he settled back into his seat with a scowl. The tension in the cabin was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Maria exchanged a worried glance with Jack, silently urging him to tread carefully. With a final check of the instruments, Jack powered up the engines. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the hull as the ship lifted off the ground. Dust swirled beneath them, obscuring the landing pad as they ascended into the sky. Through the viewport, the twin suns cast long shadows across the barren landscape, painting the scene in shades of orange and red. As they broke free of Delta 7's atmosphere, the stars came into view, endless pinpricks of light stretching across the void. Jack adjusted the course, setting their trajectory toward Earth. For now, the journey was smooth, the ship gliding effortlessly through the emptiness of space. But the strange energy signature lingered in the back of their minds, a silent reminder that the universe was full of mysteries and dangers that could strike without warning. For Jack, this mission was more than just a routine flight. It was a test of patience, skill, and resilience. And as the ship sailed onward, he couldn't shake the feeling that their trip would be anything but ordinary. The ship hummed steadily as it moved through the vast emptiness of space, its engines a constant reminder of the distance they were covering. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained tense. Frank Dawson sat stiffly in his seat, staring out the viewport with an expression that suggested he was both bored and irritated. Jack Monroe, on the other hand, kept his focus on the controls, his hands steady as he monitored their course. Maria Lopez was hunched over her toolkit, tinkering with a malfunctioning sensor panel that had been giving her trouble since they left Delta 7. For hours, the only sounds were the soft beeps of the instruments and the occasional clink of tools as Maria worked. The silence between them was heavy, almost suffocating. It wasn't until the ship's navigation system began to beep insistently that things started to change. "What's that?" Frank asked, breaking the quiet. His tone was sharp, as if he expected bad news. Jack glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing slightly. "Looks like we're approaching an asteroid field," he said calmly. "It's not uncommon out here. We'll just need to navigate around it." Frank leaned forward, squinting at the display. An asteroid field? Why? Wasn't this on the charts? "It's probably too small to show up on standard maps," Maria chimed in, looking up from her work. "Sometimes these fields drift into new areas. It happens." "Well, it shouldn't happen," Frank snapped. "We don't have time for detours. Can't we just go straight through?" Jack sighed, keeping his eyes on the controls. "Going through an asteroid field is risky. There are too many variables, rocks moving unpredictably, debris we can't see. It's safer to go around." Frank rolled his eyes. "Safer, maybe, but slower and unnecessary. You're a pilot, aren't you?" Isn't this what you're trained for? Dodging obstacles? Jack turned to face him, his patience wearing thin. I'm trained to keep us alive, Mr. Dawson. That means making smart decisions, not reckless ones. And I'm trained to make sure missions run efficiently, Frank shot back. We're wasting time skirting around this field when we could cut right through it. Every minute counts. Maria looked between the two men, sensing the tension escalating. She set down her tools and stood up, brushing her hands against her jumpsuit. Look, arguing isn't going to help. Let's just assess the situation and decide what's best. But Frank wasn't ready to back down. What's best is getting to Earth as quickly as possible. If you want to waste fuel and hours zigzagging, around rocks, fine, but don't expect me to sit quietly while you do it. Jack clenched his jaw. He didn't like being questioned, especially by someone who had no idea what flying a ship entailed. Still, he tried to remain calm. If we take the shortcut, there's a good chance we'll get hit. Even one collision could damage the hull or knock out critical systems. Do you really want to risk that? Frank crossed his arms, his lips curling into a smug grin. So, you're saying you're not confident enough in your skills to handle it? That did it. Jack turned fully toward Frank, his voice low but firm. This isn't about confidence, it's about common sense. Flying through an asteroid field isn't some stunt you pull for fun. It's dangerous and it's avoidable. If you think otherwise, then maybe you're the one who doesn't know what they're talking about. Frank's smile faded, replaced by a scowl. Are you calling me incompetent? No, Jack replied sharply. I'm calling you reckless, and if you don't start trusting my judgment, we're all going to regret it. The two men stared at each other, neither willing to budge. Maria stepped closer, trying to defuse the situation. Guys, come on, fighting won't solve anything. Let's just pick a route and stick to it. Fine, Frank said, throwing up his hands. Take the long way if you're so scared, but don't blame me when we miss our deadline, Nadirk. Ignored the jab and returned his attention to the controls. He adjusted the trajectory, steering the ship wide of the asteroid field. For a while, the tension eased, at least on the surface. Frank slumped back in his seat, muttering under his breath while Maria went back to fixing the sensor panel. Jack kept his focus ahead, though his mind was racing. He knew Frank's attitude would only make the journey harder, but he also knew, better than to let emotions cloud his judgment. As they continued onward, the asteroid field came into view. Through the viewport, they could see countless chunks of rock floating lazily in space, some as small as pebbles and others large enough to crush the ship if they collided. Jack guided the vessel carefully, weaving between the larger asteroids and avoiding any potential hazards. Despite his earlier protests, he couldn't deny that navigating the field required skill and precision. Each movement of the controls had to be exact, each decision calculated to ensure their safety. Frank watched silently for a while, his initial irritation giving way to reluctant admiration. Though he wouldn't admit it, he was impressed by Jack's ability to maneuver the ship with such ease. Still, pride kept him from saying anything positive. Instead, he focused on finding fault. This is taking forever, he muttered after several minutes. At this rate, we'll never reach Earth. We're doing fine, Jack replied tersely. Stop complaining and let me do my job. Frank opened his mouth to retort but thought better of it. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the viewport, watching as the ship slipped past another massive asteroid. Just as he began to relax, however, something unexpected happened. A sudden jolt rocked the ship, sending everyone lurching forward. Alarms blared loudly, red lights flashing across the cabin. Maria grabbed onto a nearby railing to steady herself, while Frank gripped the edge of his seat, his face pale with fear. What was that? He demanded, his voice rising in panic. Jack's hands flew over the controls, checking the readings. We clipped a piece of debris, he said, his tone grim. Nothing major, but it's damaged the outer hull. Maria rushed to the diagnostic panel, scanning for more information. It's not serious, she reported after a moment. Just a scratch, but we should patch it up before it gets worse. Frank glared at Jack accusingly. See? This is why shortcuts are better. If we'd gone straight through, we wouldn't have wasted all this time dodging rocks. Jack shot him a glare of his own. If we'd gone straight through, we'd be dead right now. Count yourself lucky we're still in one piece. Before Frank could respond, Maria interrupted. Enough arguing. Let's focus on fixing the problem. Jack, keep us steady. I'll grab the repair kit. Without waiting for a reply, she hurried to the rear of the ship, rummaging through the storage compartment until she found what she needed. Armed with patches and sealant, she headed toward the airlock, preparing to step outside and inspect the damage. I'll suit up and check it out, she said, pulling on her spacesuit. Shouldn't take long. Frank frowned. You're going out there? Isn't that dangerous? It's routine, Maria assured him, her voice calm despite the chaos. I've done this dozens of times. Just stay put and let me handle it. With that, she sealed herself into the airlock and cycled open the outer door. Moments later, she emerged from the ship, her movement slow and deliberate as she floated toward the damaged section of the hull. Through the viewport, Jack and Frank watched as she worked, applying patches and sealing cracks with practiced efficiency. Inside the cabin, the tension lingered, though it had shifted slightly. Frank seemed less confrontational now, perhaps realizing how close they'd come to disaster. Jack, for his part, remained focused on the task at hand, ensuring the ship stayed stable while Maria completed her repairs. After what felt like an eternity, Maria re-entered the ship, removing her helmet with a satisfied nod. All patched up, she announced, tossing the repair kit aside. We're good to go. Jack exhaled a sigh of relief. Good work. Let's get moving again. As Maria stowed her gear and returned to her seat, Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. Thanks, he said, his tone softer than before. For handling that. Maria shrugged. It's part of the job. Don't mention it. Jack didn't say anything, but he noticed the subtle shift in Frank's demeanor. Maybe the man wasn't completely hopeless after all. Still, he knew better than to let his guard down. Space was unpredictable, and there were bound to be more challenges ahead. For now, though, they were safe, and that was enough. With the repairs complete, Jack adjusted the course once more, steering the ship clear of the remaining asteroids. As they sailed onward, the stars stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the fragility of their journey. The ship continued its journey through the endless void of space, the hum of its engines providing a steady rhythm that filled the cabin. After the incident with the asteroid field, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. Frank Dawson, who had been so quick to criticize earlier, now seemed quieter, almost contemplative. He sat in his seat, occasionally glancing out the viewport but mostly keeping to himself. Jack Monroe remained focused on the controls, his hands steady as he guided the vessel along its course. Maria Lopez, meanwhile, had returned to tinkering with the sensor panel, determined to fix whatever was causing the strange energy readings they detected near Delta 7. For a while, the only sounds were the soft clicks of Maria's tools and the faint beeping of the navigation system. The tension between Jack and Frank had eased, though it wasn't entirely gone. Both men were careful not to provoke another argument, aware that any conflict could jeopardize their mission, or worse, their lives. It was Maria who broke the silence first. Still picking up those weird signals, she said, her voice calm, but curious. She tapped at the screen, studying the data intently. They're faint, but they're definitely there, and they're coming from somewhere ahead. Frank perked up at this, leaning forward in his seat. What kind of signals? Are we sure they're not just interference? Maria shook her head. No, this is different. It's too consistent to be random noise. Whatever it is, it's artificial. Jack frowned, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. Artificial? You mean like alien tech? Possibly, Maria replied. Or maybe something human-made. It's hard to tell without getting closer. Frank crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. If it's alien, we should investigate. This could be important. Valuable, even. Jack shot him a skeptical look. Valuable? Or dangerous? We don't know what we're dealing with here. Frank shrugged, unfazed by Jack's caution. That's why we investigate. Knowledge is power, isn't it? If we can learn something new, it might give us an edge over the Valens, or anyone else. Maria glanced between the two men, sensing another disagreement brewing. We don't Have to decide right now, she interjected diplomatically. Let's wait until we get closer and see what we're dealing with. Jack nodded reluctantly. Fine. But if things look risky, we turn back. Agreed? Frank hesitated, clearly reluctant to commit, but eventually nodded. Agreed. For now. With that settled, Jack adjusted the ship's trajectory, steering them toward the source of the signal. As they drew nearer, the readings grew stronger, confirming that whatever was emitting the energy was indeed artificial. Through the viewport, the vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before them, broken only by the occasional glimmer of distant stars. There was no sign of anything unusual. Yet, hours passed as they traveled deeper into the unknown. The E signal grew louder, more distinct, until finally Maria pointed to the screen. There, she exclaimed. It's coming from inside that asteroid field. Jack squinted at the display, which showed a dense cluster of rocks floating lazily in space. Unlike the earlier field they'd encountered, this one was smaller, but more chaotic, with jagged edges and sharp angles that made navigation tricky. Nestled within the chaos was what appeared to be a structure, a derelict station partially hidden by the surrounding debris. What is that? Frank asked, his voice tinged with both excitement and unease. It looks like some kind of research outpost, Maria replied, zooming in on the image. Probably abandoned. See how the panels are cracked and the lights are out? Jack studied the station carefully, his instincts telling him to steer clear. Could be dangerous. Stations like that don't usually go offline without a reason. Frank leaned closer, his curiosity overriding his caution. Or it could hold answers. Maybe it's related to the signals we've been tracking. We won't know unless we check it out. Maria nodded in agreement. He's got a point. If this station has data or technology, it could be worth salvaging. Jack sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. All right, fine. But we do this my way. No rushing in blind. We dock, secure the area, and proceed with caution. Clear? Both Maria and Frank nodded, though Frank's agreement came with a hint of impatience. Satisfied, Jack guided the ship toward the station, weaving carefully through the asteroid field. The closer they got, the more details emerged. The station was old, its surface pitted and scarred from years of exposure to micrometeorites and radiation. A few blinking lights suggested residual power, but overall it looked lifeless. Once they were close enough, Jack activated the docking sequence, guiding the ship into a narrow hangar bay. The process was slow and deliberate, each movement calculated to avoid scraping against the jagged walls. When the ship finally settled into place, the trio exchanged a glance, silently preparing themselves for what lay ahead. Grab your gear, Jack instructed, pulling on his utility belt. And stay alert, we don't know what we're walking into. Maria nodded, slipping a small toolkit into her pocket, while Frank retrieved a handheld scanner from the storage compartment. Together they stepped off the ship and onto the station's cold metallic floor. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor strewn with debris. Dust coated every surface, and the faint scent of decay lingered in the stale air. This place hasn't seen activity in years, Maria muttered, shining her flashlight down the hallway. Look at the corrosion on these walls. Frank ignored her observation, focusing instead on the scanner in his hand. The signal is strong here. Whatever it is, it's nearby. Jack led the way, his footsteps echoing softly as they moved, deeper into the station. The corridors were eerily quiet, save for the occasional groan of metal shifting under the weight of time. Doors hung crookedly on their hinges, and control panels blinked sporadically, their circuits long since fried. It was clear that whoever had once occupied this station had left in a hurry. After several minutes of searching, they stumbled upon a room filled with monitors and consoles, most of them dark and useless. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a single glowing orb. The object pulsed faintly, emanating a low hum that resonated through the chamber. "What is that thing?" Frank asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria approached cautiously, examining the orb from a distance. Some kind of core, maybe? Could be part of the station's mainframe or something else entirely. Jack circled the room, keeping an eye out for potential threats. Whatever it is, it's still active. That's probably what's been sending out the signals. Frank stepped closer to the orb, his fascination outweighing his caution. This could be valuable. Imagine what we could learn from it. Before anyone could stop him, he reached out to touch the orb. Instantly, the room lit up, bathing them in a harsh, blinding light. Alarms blared loudly, and the hum grew deafening, reverberating through the walls. Jack lunged forward, grabbing Frank by the arm and yanking him back. "What did you do?" Jack demanded, his voice sharp with alarm. "I didn't do anything," Frank protested, though guilt flickered across his face. "It reacted when I touched it." Maria hurried to the nearest console, frantically pressing buttons in an attempt to shut down the system. "Something's activating. I think it's booting up." The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the walls creaked ominously. Dust rained down from above as the station shuddered violently. Jack grabbed Maria's arm, pulling her toward the door. "We need to leave. Now." "But the data," Frank started, gesturing toward the orb. "Forget the data," Jack snapped. "If this place collapses, we're dead." Reluctantly, Frank followed them as they sprinted back the way they'd come. Behind them, the station groaned and buckled, pieces of the ceiling crashing to the floor. They barely made it to the hangar bay before the corridor behind them collapsed entirely, sealing off the route they'd taken. As they scrambled aboard the ship, Jack wasted no time powering up the engines. The station continued to shake violently, chunks of rock breaking free from the asteroid field and slamming into its fragile structure. With a final burst of speed, Jack piloted the ship out of the hangar and into open space, narrowly avoiding a massive chunk of debris that tumbled past them. Once they were safely away, the trio sat in stunned silence, catching their breath. Frank stared out the viewport, watching as the station disappeared into the chaos of the asteroid field. For the first time, he looked genuinely shaken. "That could have gone better," Maria said dryly, breaking the silence. Jack shot her, a wry smile. "You think?" Frank sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I may have acted impulsively back there." "You think?" Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. Despite the tension, Maria chuckled softly. "Well, at least we're alive. That's something." Frank nodded, his expression sobering. "Yes, it is. And maybe next time I'll listen to reason." Jack smirked, though there was no real malice in it. "Good. Because out here, reason keeps us breathing." As the ship sailed onward, leaving the crumbling station far behind, the trio shared a moment of quiet understanding. They had faced danger together and survived, not unscathed but alive. And in the vast, unpredictable expanse of space, that was all that mattered. The ship drifted silently through the void of space, its engines humming softly as it carried its passengers farther from the crumbling station. Inside the cabin, the mood was tense but subdued. Frank Dawson sat in his seat, staring at his hands, which were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush of their narrow escape. Maria Lopez leaned against the wall, her arms crossed as she replayed the events in her mind, while Jack Monroe remained focused on the controls, guiding the ship along its course. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air, pressing down on all of them. Finally, Frank broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and uncharacteristically humble. "I shouldn't have touched that thing." Jack glanced at him briefly before returning his attention to the navigation screen. "No, you shouldn't have. But we're alive, so let's move on." Maria nodded in agreement. "We got out okay, and that's what matters. Still, we need to figure out what that orb was and why it reacted the way it did." Frank frowned, his curiosity reigniting. "It looked advanced. Too advanced for human tech, don't you think? Maybe it was alien." "Could be," Maria replied thoughtfully. "But if it's alien, how did it end up in a human-made station? And why would anyone abandon something like that?" Jack shrugged, keeping his tone neutral. "Maybe they didn't abandon it willingly. Something could have forced them to leave." Frank leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You mean like an attack? Or some kind of accident?" It's possible, Jack admitted. That place was falling apart. Whatever happened there, it wasn't recent. Years, maybe decades ago. Maria tapped her chin, thinking aloud. If it was an accident, it might explain why the station was abandoned. But if it was an attack, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Either way, it doesn't sound good. Do you think whatever caused it is still out there? Jack shook his head. Hard to say, but we should assume the worst until we know more. The conversation lulled again, each of them lost in their own thoughts. For Frank, the experience had been a wake-up call. He had always prided himself on his intelligence and decisiveness, but today, his impulsiveness had nearly gotten them killed. He glanced at Jack, who seemed unfazed by the chaos they'd left behind, and felt a pang of respect, or perhaps envy, for the older man's calm demeanor. Maria, meanwhile, was preoccupied with the technical aspects of what they'd seen. The odd orb's design was unlike anything she'd encountered before, and its behavior suggested it was far more than just a piece of machinery. She wondered if it had been part of an experiment, or perhaps even a weapon. Either way, it was clear that the station had been involved in something dangerous. As the hours passed, the trio tried to settle into a routine, though the memory of the derelict station lingered in the back of their minds. Maria busied herself with repairs, patching up minor damage the ship had sustained during their hasty departure. Jack monitored their course, ensuring they stayed on track for Earth. Frank, for once, kept to himself, staring out the viewport as he wrestled with his thoughts. Eventually, Maria decided to break the quiet. "Do you think anyone else knows about that station?" she asked, glancing at Jack. He shrugged. "Probably not. It was hidden pretty well inside that asteroid field. Whoever built it didn't want it found." Frank frowned. "But someone must have known about it, those energy signals. We picked them up, didn't we? What if others have too?" Jack considered this for a moment. If others have detected the signals, they probably assumed it was interference or ignored it. Most people wouldn't risk investigating something like that. "But we did," Maria pointed out. "And look where it got us." Frank sighed, rubbing his temples. "Maybe we should report it when we get back. Let the authorities handle it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And tell them what? That we stumbled upon a mysterious station and almost got ourselves killed because someone touched a glowing orb? Well, when you put it like that," Frank muttered, trailing off. Maria chuckled softly. "We'll decide what to do later. For now, let's focus on getting home." Despite her words, the mystery of the station continued to gnaw at all of them. It wasn't just the orb that intrigued them, it was the questions it raised. Who had built the station? What had they been researching? And why had they left in such a hurry? Later that evening, as the ship sailed through the endless expanse of stars, Frank approached Jack, who was seated in the cockpit. The diplomat hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" he began cautiously. Jack glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Sure." Frank cleared his throat. "Back there, when everything started shaking, you didn't hesitate. You just acted. How do you stay so calm under pressure?" Jack smirked faintly. "Years of practice. When you've been flying as long as I have, you learn to trust your instincts. Panicking only makes things worse." Frank nodded slowly. "I guess I could stand to learn a thing or two from you." To his surprise, Jack chuckled. "Don't sell yourself short. You're smart, Frank. Just try not to let your curiosity override your common sense next time." Frank smiled weakly. "Deal." As the night wore on, the tension between them eased further. They weren't friends, not yet, but there was a newfound understanding, a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. Even Maria noticed the change, smiling to herself as she overheard their conversation. The next morning, the ship's sensors picked up another anomaly. This time, it was a faint distress signal coming from a nearby sector. The message was garbled, barely intelligible, but one word stood out: help. Maria frowned as she studied the readings. It's weak, but it's definitely artificial, could be another ship. Jack nodded, adjusting the course. Let's check it out. If someone's in trouble, we can't just ignore it. Frank hesitated. Are you sure that's wise? After what happened at the station, we'll be careful, Jack assured him. But we can't turn our backs on people in need. As they drew closer to the source of the signal, the outline of a small vessel came into view. It was battered and scarred, its hull pockmarked with damage. A quick scan revealed that life support was failing, and the ship's power reserves were nearly depleted. There's someone aboard, Maria reported, pointing to the readings. One life sign, weak but stable. Without hesitation, Jack guided their ship alongside the damaged vessel and initiated docking procedures. Once secured, the trio suited up and prepared to board the other craft. As they stepped inside, the stench of burnt wiring and stale air hit them immediately. This place has seen better days, Maria muttered, shining her flashlight down the corridor. They followed the life signs to the cockpit, where they found a lone survivor slumped unconscious in the pilot's seat. The man was gaunt, his face pale and streaked with dirt, but he was breathing. Maria quickly assessed his condition, finding no major injuries beyond exhaustion and dehydration. He's lucky to be alive, she said, attaching a portable oxygen mask to his face. Let's get him back to our ship. With careful coordination, they carried the man aboard their vessel and laid him in the sleeping area. Maria hooked him up to a medical scanner, monitoring his vitals closely. After a few minutes, his eyes fluttered open and he stared at them blearily. Where? He croaked, his voice hoarse. You're safe, Jack told him gently. What happened to your ship? The man swallowed hard, struggling to speak. Attacked. Pirates. Took everything. Left me for dead. Frank exchanged a glance with Maria, both of them visibly unsettled. Space piracy was rare but not unheard of, especially in remote sectors like this one. Jack leaned closer, his tone firm but reassuring. Don't worry about that now. Rest. We'll take care of you. As the man drifted back to sleep, the trio returned to the cockpit, their earlier camaraderie replaced by a shared sense of unease. This sector isn't safe, Jack said grimly. We need to stay alert. Frank nodded, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine concern. Agreed. Let's hope we don't run into any more trouble. Maria checked the navigation system, plotting the safest route forward. We're close to Earth now. If we stick to populated routes, we should be fine. Jack gripped the controls tightly, his jaw set with determination. Then let's keep moving. The sooner we get home, the better. As the ship sailed onward, the stars stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the dangers it held. But despite the challenges they'd faced, and those that still lay ahead, the trio felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they had survived the unknown, and together they would see their journey through to the end. The ship moved steadily through the void of space, its engines humming softly as it carried its passengers closer to Earth. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Jack Monroe sat in the pilot's seat, his eyes fixed on the navigation screen as he guided the vessel along a safe route. Maria Lopez busied herself tending to the survivor they had rescued, checking his vitals and ensuring he remained stable. Frank Dawson, meanwhile, paced back and forth, his mind racing with questions about the man and the dangers they had encountered. The survivor, whose name they learned was Alex Carter, was slowly regaining strength. He had been drifting alone. For days, his ship crippled by an attack from pirates who had stripped it of supplies and left him to die. Though weak and disoriented, Alex was grateful for their help and eager to share what little information he had about the attackers. They weren't just scavengers, Alex said, his voice hoarse but steady. They were organized, knew exactly what they were doing and who they were targeting. Jack frowned, leaning forward slightly. What do you mean? Were they after something specific? Alex nodded. Yeah. They kept asking about some kind of artifact. Said it was worth more than anything else in the galaxy. I didn't know what they were talking about, but they didn't believe me. Maria exchanged a glance with Jack, her expression thoughtful. An artifact? Do you think they meant the orb we saw at that station? It's possible, Jack replied, his tone cautious. If it's valuable enough, it could explain why someone would go to such lengths to find it. Frank stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. Do you think those pirates are still out there, looking for it? Maybe, Jack said, his jaw tightening. Which means we need to be careful. If they're willing to destroy ships and leave people for dead, they won't hesitate to come after us if they think we know something. Alex leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes briefly. You should steer clear of them. They're dangerous, armed to the teeth and ruthless. I barely escaped with my life. Frank crossed his arms, his expression grim. Great. Just what we needed. Space pirates chasing us. We'll handle it, Jack said firmly. For now, let's focus on getting home. The closer we get to Earth, the safer we'll be. Maria nodded in agreement. We'll stick to populated routes. That should keep us out of trouble. With that decided, they returned to their tasks, each of them playing a role in keeping the ship running smoothly. Maria continued to monitor Alex's condition, while Jack adjusted the course to ensure they avoided any potential threats. Frank, despite his earlier impulsiveness, seemed to have settled into a quieter, more cooperative demeanor. He helped, where he could, fetching tools for Maria or relaying information from the sensors. As the hours passed, the tension began to ease slightly. The ship sailed through a region of space dotted with small colonies and trading posts, offering a sense of security they hadn't felt since leaving Delta 7. For a brief moment, it seemed like the worst was behind them. But then the alarms blared. What's happening? Frank asked, his voice rising in alarm. Jack's hands flew to the controls, scanning the readings. We've got company, 2 ships closing fast. Maria rushed to the sensor panel, her movements quick and precise. They're armed. Probably the same pirates Alex warned us about. Frank's face paled. What do? We can't outrun them. We won't have to, Jack said, his voice calm but firm. Hold on tight. Without hesitation, Jack activated the ship's evasive maneuvers, sending it into a sharp dive. The 2 pursuing vessels followed closely, their weapons firing bursts of energy that narrowly missed the hull. Inside the cabin, the trio braced themselves as the ship rocked violently, the force of the near misses rattling every surface. This is insane, Frank shouted over the chaos. They're going to blow us apart. Not if I can help it, Jack muttered under his breath. His hands moved swiftly over the controls, weaving the ship through the hail of fire with practiced precision. Each twist and turn brought them closer to safety, though the pirates showed no sign of giving up. Maria gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles white. We need a plan. We can't keep dodging forever. Jack glanced at the navigation screen, his mind racing. There's a nearby asteroid field ahead. If we can lose them in there, we might stand a chance. Frank shook his head, his voice tinged with panic. Are you crazy? We barely survived the last one. It's our best shot, Jack replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Trust me. With the pirates hot on their tail, Jack steered the ship toward the dense cluster of rocks. As they entered the field, the larger vessels struggled to keep up, their size making it difficult to navigate the narrow gaps between asteroids. Jack took full advantage of this, guiding the smaller, more agile ship through the chaos with ease. The pirates fired relentlessly, their shots ricocheting off the surrounding debris and creating a deadly storm of shrapnel. Inside the cabin, the trio ducked and covered their heads as chunks of rock slammed against the hull. Sparks flew from the control panel as one impact damaged part of the system, forcing Maria to scramble and make emergency repairs. We're losing power to the rear stabilizers, she shouted, her voice strained. Keep working on it, Jack called back, his focus unwavering. I'll buy us some time. Through sheer determination, Jack managed to outmaneuver the pirates, using the asteroids as cover and leading them into increasingly treacherous territory. One of the pursuing ships misjudged a turn and collided with a massive rock, exploding in a brilliant flash of light. The other ship hesitated, clearly unwilling to risk the same fate, and eventually retreated. When the danger had passed, the cabin fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Jack slumped back in his seat, his hands trembling slightly from the strain. Maria finished securing the damaged systems while Frank stared out the viewport, his face pale but awestruck. "That was incredible," Frank finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" Jack smirked faintly, though there was no real pride in it. "Years of practice, and a bit of luck." Maria chuckled softly, wiping sweat from her brow. "Well, I'm just glad we're alive. Let's not do that again anytime soon." Frank nodded emphatically. "Agreed. Space pirates are officially my least favorite thing in the universe." Despite the relief, the encounter left them all shaken. They had narrowly escaped death yet again, and the memory of the pirates' relentless pursuit lingered in their minds. Still, they knew they couldn't dwell on it. There was still work to be done, and Earth was closer than ever. As the ship emerged from the asteroid field, the stars stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of the vastness of space and the challenges it held. But amidst the uncertainty, the trio felt a renewed sense of unity. They had faced danger together and survived, not unscathed, but stronger for it. Later that evening, as the ship sailed smoothly through open space, Frank approached Jack, who was seated in the cockpit. The diplomat hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology," Frank began, his tone sincere. "I've been difficult since we started this journey, arrogant even, but you've proven yourself time and again. I wouldn't be here without you." Jack raised an eyebrow, surprised by the admission. "It's fine. We've all made mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." Frank smiled faintly. "Still, thank you. For everything. You saved my life today." Jack nodded, his expression softening. "You're welcome. Just try not to make me regret it." They shared a laugh, the tension between them finally gone. Even Maria noticed the change, smiling to herself as she overheard their conversation. It was clear that the hardships they had endured had forged a bond none of them had expected. As the night wore on, the ship drew closer to Earth, the blue-green orb growing larger in the distance. The journey had been long and fraught with peril, but they were almost home. And though they knew the galaxy was full of mysteries and dangers, they also knew they had faced them together, and that made all the difference. The ship glided smoothly through the final stretch of space, its engines humming softly as Earth came into view. The planet hung in the distance, a vibrant sphere of blue and green surrounded by swirling white clouds. It was a sight that never failed to inspire awe, even for those who had seen it countless times before. Inside the cabin, the mood was lighter than it had been in days. Jack Monroe sat at the controls, his hands steady as he guided the vessel toward the atmosphere. Maria Lopez leaned against the wall, watching the approaching planet with a small smile while Frank Dawson stared out the viewport, his expression thoughtful. For the first time in what felt like forever, they were close to home. The journey had been long and perilous, filled with challenges that tested their courage and resolve. Yet here they were, alive and together, ready to step back onto solid ground. Despite everything they had faced, the asteroid field, the derelict station, the glowing orb, the pirates, they had made it through, and though scars remained, both physical and emotional, there was a sense of accomplishment in knowing they had survived. As they entered Earth's orbit, Jack adjusted the trajectory, preparing for re-entry. "We'll be landing soon," he announced, his voice calm but tinged with relief. "Let's make sure everything's secure." Maria nodded, moving to check the ship's systems one last time. She ran diagnostics on the engines, life support and navigation, ensuring everything was functioning properly. Satisfied, she turned to Jack. "All clear. We're good to go." Frank lingered near the viewport, his gaze fixed on the planet below. "It feels strange," he said quietly, "being so close after everything we've been through." Jack glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Frank hesitated, searching for the right words. "Like, none of it seems real anymore. The station, the orb, the pirates. It all feels like some kind of dream. But then I look at my hands, and I remember how close we came to not making it. Maria joined them, her tone gentle. That's normal. Space has a way of making you feel small. But we made it. That's what matters. Frank nodded slowly, his expression softening. You're right. And I couldn't have done it without you two. Jack smirked faintly. Don't get mushy on
us now. Save the speeches for when we're planetside. They shared a laugh, the tension melting away. For all their differences, the trio had grown closer over the course of their journey.
What had started as a tense and uneasy partnership had evolved into something deeper, a mutual respect forged through shared struggles and triumphs. The ship descended through the atmosphere, buffeted slightly by turbulence as it adjusted to the pull of gravity. Outside the viewport, the sky shifted from black to deep blue, then brightened as they broke through the cloud layer. Below them, the sprawling landscape of Earth stretched endlessly, cities glittering like jewels, oceans shimmering under the sunlight, and vast stretches of wilderness untouched by human hands. Beautiful, isn't it? Maria murmured, her voice filled with quiet admiration. It is, Jack agreed, his eyes scanning the horizon. Makes you forget how messy things can get down there. Frank chuckled dryly. Speak for yourself. I'm looking forward to a hot shower and a real bed. They laughed again, the sound light and carefree, a stark contrast to the weight of their earlier experiences. As the ship touched down on a landing pad at a bustling spaceport, the hum of the engines faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved. They simply sat there, absorbing the reality of their return. Finally, Jack stood and stretched, cracking his neck. All right, let's wrap this up. Time to face the music. Maria grabbed her toolkit, slinging it over her shoulder, while Frank straightened his suit, smoothing out the wrinkles. Together, they stepped off the ship and onto the landing pad, greeted by the cool breeze of Earth's air. Around them, the spaceport buzzed with activity, ships taking off and landing, workers hauling cargo, and travelers rushing to their destinations. A team of officials approached them, led by a stern-looking woman in a navy blue uniform. Welcome. Back, she said, her tone formal but warm. We received your report about the incident with the pirates. Can you tell us more? Jack nodded, stepping forward. We encountered two ships in uncharted space. They attacked us, likely looking for something valuable. We managed to evade them, but not without damage. The woman jotted down notes, her expression serious. And the survivor you picked up? He's resting now, Maria replied. He confirmed the pirates were targeting specific artifacts. Whatever they're after, it's worth a lot. Frank chimed in, his tone measured. There's also the matter of the derelict station we found. It had some kind of advanced technology, an orb that emitted strange signals. We didn't retrieve it, but someone should investigate further. The official nodded thoughtfully. Understood. We'll send a team to look into it. In the meantime, thank you for your efforts. You've done humanity proud. With that, the group dispersed, leaving the trio alone on the pad. For a moment, they simply stood there, taking in the sights and sounds of Earth. It was over. Their mission was complete. Well, Maria said finally, breaking the silence. What now? Jack shrugged, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Now, we rest. Then we figure out our next move. Frank nodded, his expression resolute. Whatever it is, I think I've learned my lesson about recklessness. From now on, I'll trust the experts. Maria grinned. Good to hear. Just don't forget it. They shared one last laugh before parting ways, each heading toward their own path. Jack climbed into a transport shuttle bound for a quiet retreat where he could recharge, while Maria disappeared into the crowd, eager to visit family she hadn't seen in months. Frank lingered for a moment longer, gazing up at the sky. Despite the chaos and danger they had faced, he felt a strange sense of peace. Space was vast and unpredictable, full of mysteries and threats that defied understanding. But it was also beautiful, a place where people could come together and overcome even the greatest odds. And though he knew he would never forget the lessons he had learned, he also knew he wouldn't trade the experience for anything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the spaceport in a warm orange glow, Frank turned and walked away, ready to embrace whatever came next.